In the early 1870s, Kansas was still wide and unfinished. The land looked endless. The roads were not smooth roads at all, just lines cut into dirt and grass. A person could ride for hours and see nothing but sky, fields, and distant trees. Travelers moved through that open space with hope and fear in the same heart. Hope for a new start, fear of storms, sickness, thieves, and a long silence between towns. On the frontier, even a small problem could become deadly. A broken wheel, a lost horse, a wrong turn dot. So when a traveler saw a cabin, a headlight in the window, smoke from the chimney, it felt like a gift. But one cabin in southeastern Kansas did not mean safety. It meant a mystery that would shake the region, frighten families, and leave a question that still has no proven answer. They would later call them the Bloody Benders. The place looked simple: a small store, a small home, a stopping point on a busy trail. People could buy supplies, rest for a moment, maybe eat a meal, and continue their journey. It was a kind of place a tired traveler wanted to trust, and that is the first strange part of the story. The Benders did not look like famous criminals. They looked like ordinary settlers trying to survive. The family was described as, for people living together, 2 were older, 2 were younger. The names most often repeated were John Bender, Ma Bender, John Bender Jr., and Kate Bender. Some reports used other names too, which later made the story even more confusing. Even today, researchers argue about who they really were. But on the trail, names mattered less than warmth, food, and a place to sit. Their cabin stood in Lebec County, near the small settlement area by Cherry Vale. It was close to routes travelers used to cross Kansas. This made the cabin useful and also dangerous, because when many strangers pass through one spot, it becomes easy for someone to hide a pattern. A traveler might stop there once in life. If that traveler never arrived at the next town, people would not know where to look. They might assume the person got lost, or met bandits, or decided to disappear on purpose. The frontier created perfect cover for anyone who wanted others to vanish. At first, there were only small signs: a missing neighbor, a traveler who never wrote home, a wagon seen one day, gone the next. These stories did not always connect. In those days, many people were poor, moving, and unknown. Records were thin, letters could take weeks. Sometimes they never arrived, so a disappearance could feel like a sad accident, not a crime. But then the rumor began quiet at first, like a wind through tall grass. Some said people went down that road and did not come back. Some said the Bender's place felt strange. Not always, not for everyone, but sometimes a look, a pause, a question asked the wrong way. Still, most travelers pushed those feelings aside, because a hot meal is a strong reason to trust. Inside the cabin, there was said to be a simple setup: a store area in front and a living space behind. A hanging curtain divided the room. The house was not large, but it had enough space to welcome a customer. Enough space to make someone sit, talk, relax. That chair near the curtain would become famous in later stories, not because it was special, but because of what people believed happened to those who sat there. This is where the story must be. Careful. Many details about the Bloody Benders come from newspaper reports, later retellings, and local memory. Some parts are strongly supported by what was found later. Other parts may be shaped by fear, time, and repeated storytelling. But what made the case explode was not a rumor. It was a disappearance that the community could not ignore, because the missing man was not just a stranger on the road. He was Dr. William York. William York was known, he was connected, and he was not the type of person who vanished without leaving a trace. When he failed to return, people did not shrug and move on. They asked questions, they searched, they traced his last steps, and slowly the trail of concern drifted toward that cabin, toward the Benders. As worry grew, something else grew too. Pressure died in frontier communities. Pressure could build fast. Once suspicion focused on a person, it spread from house to house, from town to town. People began to talk openly. They shared what they had seen, what they had felt, what they had heard. And then in the spring of 1873, the tension reached a breaking point. Search parties formed. Men rode out. Neighbors checked roads and creeks. People started keeping track of who had been where and when. The land, which once hid secrets easily, began to feel smaller. The Benders were now at the center of attention. Their homestead was no longer just a quiet stop. It was a place people watched. And that is when the story takes its sharpest turn. Because when the community moved closer, the Benders did not stay to explain. They did not stay to defend themselves. They did not stay to face questions. One day, the cabin was there as usual, and then suddenly it was empty. No family, no answers, no clean ending, just a quiet building in the grass. As if the people inside had stepped out for a moment, but they did not come back. And that single fact more than any rumor lit a fire in the public mind because innocent. People do not usually run when they are about to be questioned, and guilty people often do. What happened inside that home? What happened to the people who disappeared on that road? And where did the bloody Benders go? The cabin stood quiet on the Kansas prairie, and that silence felt wrong. For weeks, people had been talking about missing travelers. They had been talking about Dr. William York. They had been talking about the Benders. The talk had grown into pressure, and the pressure had grown into a search. Then the Benders disappeared. No note, no message, no friendly goodbye. The place that once offered food and rest now looked like a stage. After the actors had run away, neighbors did not treat it like a simple move. On the frontier, families moved often, but they usually sold things, packed carefully, or told someone. This felt sudden. It felt rushed. It felt like someone leaving in fear. And fear, in a case like this, only points in one direction. Men from nearby settlements began to gather. Some came out of concern. Some came out of anger. Some came because curiosity is powerful when a story turns dark. They rode out in groups, and they approached the Bender property with caution. At first, they looked for ordinary signs. A wagon track, a broken fence, a sign of a fight. They checked the cabin, the yard, the small store area, and the land nearby. They expected to find something, anything that would explain what happened. Instead, they found a place that looked like it had been left in a hurry. The cabin had been used. The kitchen area showed signs of living. There were items left behind that a careful family would normally take. That did not prove a crime, but it did not calm anyone's mind either. Because people did not come out there for a missing spoon. They came out there for missing human beings. Dr. William York was still gone. His family was still waiting. His brother, Colonel Alexander York, was still pushing the search forward. On the frontier, that kind of determined pressure mattered. It made people act. It made officials listen. It made neighbors stop accepting, maybe as an answer. So the search party did more than glance around. They studied the land. The ground around a homestead can tell a story. A place where people farm and live will have clear paths, gardens, animal pens, and working areas. But a place hiding secrets can have different signs. Soil that looks disturbed, a patch of earth that sinks slightly, a spot where grass grows oddly, or not at all. Some accounts say the searchers noticed an area that did not look natural. It was not a dramatic moment at first. It was a small thing, the kind of small thing that can change everything. A depression. In the ground, a place that looked like it had been filled in, and in a case filled with missing people. Filled in is the word that makes the stomach tighten. They began to dig. Not everyone watched closely at first. Some men stood away, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. Some tried to stay calm. Some spoke in quiet, serious voices. The air held that strange mix of emotions, hope and dread at the same time. Hope that they would find a clue, dread of what that clue might be. The digging continued. The soil came up in heavy clumps. The hole grew. The mood changed because sometimes the earth answers quickly. What they found was not one lost object, not a dropped pocket knife, not an abandoned bag. They found proof that the rumors were not just talk. The discovery that followed would turn the bloody benders from a local fear into a national shock. As the digging expanded, more people were called in. The search moved from looking around to investigating. The cabin was checked again, this time with sharper eyes. People paid attention to the layout, the curtain that separated spaces, and the areas where a person could hide something from view, and the land, especially the areas near the cabin, became the main focus, because the trail had taken people, but the trail itself could not bury them. Only someone nearby could do that. As the days passed, the searchers uncovered what they believed were multiple burial spots on the property. The exact number would be argued later, and different reports would claim different totals. In those first days, information moved fast and often in incomplete pieces. But one thing was clear. The missing were not simply lost. They had been stopped, and if they had been stopped, then someone had stopped them. The most important confirmation came when the searchers believed they found Dr. William York among the dead. That changed the story again. Because now it was not only a string of strangers, not only rumor and fear. Now it was a named man with a known family connected to people who would not let the case fade. The York family's efforts helped keep the story alive and kept the hunt moving. The news spread across Kansas and beyond. Newspapers picked it up, towns talked about it, travelers became afraid of lone cabins, families told their sons and husbands to avoid risky stops. People who had once trusted strangers on the trail began to look at every offer of help in a new way. The frontier was dangerous before. Now it felt haunted. But even with the terrible discovery, the searchers still faced a problem that made everyone furious. The benders were gone. No one could question them. No one could put them on trial. No one could force answers out of them. The land might speak, but the land cannot tell names, motives, or plans. So the community did what communities do when formal justice feels far away. They looked for the benders themselves. Rumors exploded in every direction. Some said the benders escaped with a head start, long before suspicion peaked. Some said they used the trail routes like experienced travelers, blending into crowds. Some claimed they took a train. Others believed they used false names, because the benders may have been using false names from the start. The lack of photographs made this worse. On the frontier, a person could change a haircut, change clothing, and become new in the next town. A family could separate, travel different roads, and disappear into the movement of settlers. And every new rumor gave people a fresh target. The problem was simple. Everyone wanted an ending, but there was no clean ending to grab. Meanwhile, the people left behind were forced to live with the hardest part of any true story like this. The dead could not speak. The missing had lost their chance to be found alive. And the living were stuck with questions that might never be answered. Who were the benders really? Were they truly a family or a group pretending? Did they work alone, or did someone else help them? And the biggest question of all, how does a group linked to such horror simply vanish? After the digging began, fear moved faster than any horse. The Bender cabin was no longer just a stop on a trail. It became a warning. People spoke its name in a lower voice. Parents watched their children more closely. Travelers stopped trusting lonely houses. And in towns across Kansas, the same sentence kept repeating. The benders are gone. That fact was like a spark in dry grass. Because the public did not only want answers, the public wanted justice. And when justice does not arrive quickly, anger grows in its place. Soon, wanted notices and reward talk spread from settlement to settlement. Men gathered in groups at general stores and post offices. They leaned in close over newspapers. They argued about what the benders looked like. They traded stories of who had seen them last. But the problem was simple, and it was huge. No one had a clear picture of the benders. There were no confirmed photographs. There were no official records that everyone trusted. And there were different descriptions, depending on who was speaking. Some said one thing, others said another. That made the hunt feel like trying to catch smoke. A person can run faster when no one knows exactly who they are. The search began near the cabin. Riders checked nearby roads, creek crossings, and small towns. They asked questions at stations and trading posts. They looked for fresh wagon tracks. And they looked for strangers who acted nervous. But the frontier was full of strangers. Kansas was full of people arriving and leaving. Some came for land. Some came for work. Some came to start over under a new name. That was normal life in the West. And that is why this case became so hard. The benders could blend in with the same movement that brought their victims down the trail. People also began to whisper about trains. In the 1870s, trains were changing America. They could carry a person far away faster than a horse ever could. If the benders reached the station, they could be gone in a day, and no one chasing on horseback would catch them. That thought frightened people even more. It meant the benders might not be hiding nearby. They might be anywhere. And the wider the map became, the more the story changed. At first, it was about a cabin in Kansas. Now it was about a family of killers who might be crossing state lines. Now, it was about the fear that they could start again in another place, under another name, doing the same thing. The newspapers fed the fire. Each new story added another detail, another rumor, another theory. Readers in faraway towns learned the name Bloody Benders and felt chills, even if they had never seen Kansas. But newspapers also created a problem. They made the story bigger than the facts. People began to believe what they wanted to believe. Some imagined secret tunnels. Some imagined hidden partners. Some imagined the benders as monsters who could vanish like ghosts. And when a story becomes bigger than facts, it becomes harder to solve. In local towns, the mood turned sharp. People feared that someone had helped the benders escape. They suspected neighbors. They suspected travelers. They suspected anyone who seemed to calm. Because fear makes people look for an easy target. Men formed posses. Some were official. Some were not. Some wanted real evidence. Some wanted revenge. In that kind of atmosphere, a person could be accused without proof, simply for being different. That was another dark side of frontier justice. The same anger that chased the guilty could also harm the innocent. And false leads started to appear. A traveler said he saw a woman who looked like Kate Bender. A store owner claimed a man came in who matched John Jr. A farmer insisted he saw an older couple walking along a road at night. These reports came from every direction. They sounded confident, and they often made people move fast. But most of them ended the same way. No arrests, no proof. No benders. Sometimes the witnesses had only seen a tired family traveling west. Sometimes they had seen people who looked similar. Sometimes the story grew in the telling, and by the time it reached the posse, it was no longer reliable. And each time a lead failed, frustration grew. There was another reason the leads failed. Many people began to suspect that the benders did not stay together. A group of four is easier to notice. But if they split into pairs, or even alone, they could travel quietly. A single woman could claim she was a widow. A single man could claim he was looking for work. An older couple could claim they were moving to join family. On the frontier, that kind of story was common. No one would ask too many questions. And if the benders used false names before, they could easily use false names again. This is where the story becomes a biography of uncertainty. Because the case was not only about what happened at the cabin, it became about identity itself. Who were the benders before they arrived in Kansas? Were those their real names? Were they truly a family, or a group pretending to be one. Some people believed Kate was the most dangerous because she was said to be charming and intelligent, able to earn trust quickly. Others believed the older couple were the leaders. Others believed John Jr. was the key, but no one could agree. And without agreement, the hunt stayed chaotic. While the public chased rumors, families lived with a quiet of pain. A wife in a small town might still look down the road each evening, hoping a husband would return. A parent might hold a letter that was never answered. A child might grow up, hearing a name they were told not to speak. For them, the story was not entertainment. It was a loss that never fully closed. And every time the Benders escaped another search, that loss felt sharper. Then came the most dangerous part of the manhunt, the belief that someone, somewhere, had captured the Benders. In different places, at different times, people claimed they had caught them. Sometimes a suspect was arrested. Sometimes a crowd formed before officials could even check the facts. Sometimes mobs threatened violence. In a world without strong identification, a single accusation could be fatal. And still, after all the noise, nothing became final. No confirmed trial, no confirmed punishment, no proven end. The Benders remained a shadow story, a name that slipped away every time someone tried to hold it. By the time the Bender cabin was empty and the graves were being discussed, one truth became impossible to ignore. No one was fully sure who the Benders really were. People knew the name Bloody Benders, but a name is not an identity. On the frontier, names changed icily. A person could arrive in a new county and become someone else by simply saying so. There were few papers, few photos, few ways to prove anything. That is what made the case more than a hunt for criminals. It became a hunt for reality. In towns and newspapers, the Benders were described as a family of four: an older man called John, an older woman called Ma, a younger man called John Jr., a younger woman called Kate. But the details often did not match from one report to another. Some accounts gave different names, others gave different ages. Some described Kate as educated and confident. Others described her as quieter. Some described the men as unfriendly. Others described them as slow and simple. Each description added a new layer of confusion. And that confusion was not small, because if no one could describe them clearly, then no one could catch them clearly. The cabin had been a place where strangers met strangers. A traveler came in, asked for food, paid, and left. People did not study faces like detectives. They did not write down exact details. They just wanted to continue their journey. That is how ordinary life on the trail worked. But in hindsight, it looked like the perfect setup for deception. The story around Kate became the most complicated. Many later retellings describe her as the public face of the cabin. Some say she was friendly, talkative, and persuasive. Some say she talked about big ideas, like religion, the spirit world, or the future. Some accounts even claim she drew crowds with her words, like a small-time speaker traveling from place to place. Whether every detail is true or not, the larger point remains important. If Kate could charm people, she could also lower their guard. And on the frontier, lowering someone's guard could be the difference between leaving alive and never leaving at all. When people later tried to explain how travelers could walk into danger, they often focused on this idea. They wanted to believe the Benders had a trick, a method, a performance, because the alternative was harder to accept. The alternative was that danger can look normal, that a person can smile, offer coffee, and still plan harm. There was also the question of whether the Benders were truly related. Some people believed they were a real family. Others believed they were only pretending. The family image made them seem safer to travelers. A lone man might look suspicious. A rough group of men might scare people away, but a family suggests rules. Stability, safety. If it was an act, it was a smart act. And if it was an act, then the Benders had been lying from the very start. As the manhunt continued, those identity questions became even more important, because the public began to see a frightening possibility. If the Benders could invent a family, they could invent a new one. They could walk into another town, take new names, and start again. The West was full of movement. People arrived with nothing, built something, and left again. That was common. So a group leaving Kansas did not automatically seem suspicious in another state. It would only look suspicious if someone knew who they were looking at, and that is exactly what no one had. Rumors exploded again. People claimed to see the Benders in nearby towns, then in distant states, then even farther. Some said they traveled by wagon. Others said they rode by train. Some claimed the group separated and never met again, but none of it could be proven. And the longer time passed, the more the story changed. A rumor could become fact after being repeated enough times. A weak description could become a confident one. A guess could turn into a full story with details that were never checked. That is how legends are born. And the bloody Benders became a legend while the case was still alive. For victims' families, the identity confusion was not interesting. It was painful. If a loved one is missing, the mind searches for closure. It looks for a clear ending, a capture, a trial, a confession, a grave. But the Benders offered none of that. They left behind fear and silence. Even if the graves proved something terrible happened, they did not prove the full truth. They did not explain motives. They did not explain how many victims. They did not explain who the Benders really were. They did not explain where they went. So the families were forced to live with a story that had no final page. And the public, watching from a distance, reacted. In a different way, they filled the empty space with imagination. The Benders became larger than lifelike monsters from a campfire story. People wanted a clear villain they could picture. They wanted a clear ending they could repeat. They wanted a tidy answer to a messy reality. But the frontier did not offer tidy answers. The frontier offered missing people and fading tracks. In a strange way, that is what makes the bloody Benders so disturbing. Not only the violence, but the uncertainty. Because if people can vanish into new names, then justice depends on luck, not law. It depends on whether the right person happens to recognize the right face at the right moment, and in the 1870s, recognize was a weak tool. And this part of the story also explains something else. But why so many captures failed at different times? People believed the Benders had been caught. Sometimes suspects were arrested. Sometimes crowds gathered. Sometimes the public demanded punishment, but then the evidence fell apart, or the suspects did not match, or the story could not be confirmed. Without solid identity, even a confident accusation could collapse. And while the towns argued, the real Benders, if they were still alive, could keep moving. So part 4 ends with a hard truth. The bloody Benders were not only escaping across land, they were escaping through confusion. They were escaping through the weakness of records. They were escaping through the simple fact that people remembered faces differently, and stories spread faster than proof. After the cabin was found empty and the graves were discussed, the bloody Benders became more than a local case. They became a national obsession. People wanted an ending. They wanted a capture. They wanted a courtroom moment where the truth would be spoken out loud. But instead of an ending, they got something else. They got stories. And once stories begin, they do not stop easily. In the months that followed, rumors spread across Kansas and beyond. Some reports came from people who truly believed they had seen the Benders. Other reports came from fear and imagination. But all of them had the same effect. They kept the case alive. A man would claim he saw a woman like Kate in a small town. A shop owner would claim a strange older couple passed through and asked too many questions. A traveler would say he met a young man who spoke like he had secrets. Each story sounded possible, and that was the problem. because possible is not proof. In that era, a sighting could start a chase within hours. Men would mount horses, grab rifles, and ride toward the next town. People would stop wagons on the road. A sheriff might question strangers. A local paper might print a short notice warning. Citizens to watch for certain faces. But the descriptions were never strong enough. Not strong enough to confirm, not strong enough to convict, not strong enough to end the nightmare. And so the Benders remained ghosts. The public hunger for justice created another danger. When people are afraid, they do not only look for the guilty, they also look for someone to blame. So when strangers were caught on the road, people who looked close enough, they became targets. Some were detained, some were threatened, some were chased out of town. In a frontier world, a rumor could be a weapon, and the Bloody Benders rumor was one of the sharpest weapons anyone had seen. Many towns began to believe that the Benders would never be captured by law. They believed the Benders would be captured by anger. This is where the revenge stories began. Some people claimed that a posse finally caught them on a back road. Some claimed the Benders were punished in secret, far from courtrooms, far from newspapers, far from witnesses willing to speak. Others claimed the Benders were killed and buried when no one would ever find them. These stories sounded satisfying to listeners because they offered closure. But there was a problem again. No bodies, no confirmed names, no final evidence, and without evidence, even the most comforting story remains a guess. There was also a different kind of rumor, one that frightened people more than revenge. The rumor that the Benders escaped successfully, that they crossed into another state, that they used new names, that they found another trail, another cabin, another place where travelers needed help. This fear did not come from imagination alone. It came from the reality of the time. People moved often, people changed identities easily, and criminals could hide inside the same movement as honest families. If a group wanted to disappear, the frontier gave them many ways to do it. So the public began to ask a chilling question. If the Benders were never caught, how could anyone be sure they stopped? As months passed, the case began to split into two worlds. One world was the world of facts, the abandoned cabin, the disturbed ground, the missing people, the search efforts, and the growing fear. The other world was the world of claims, sightings, arrests that did not hold, and stories of revenge that could not be confirmed. In that second world, the Benders were everywhere. In one story, Kate was seen traveling alone, pretending to be a widow. In another story, the older woman was seen with a new man, as if she had switched partners. In another story, John Jr. was said to be working under a different name, hiding in plain sight. But in all these stories, the truth stayed out of reach. The Benders were like shadows on a wall. A person could point at the shadow and feel sure, but when the person turned the light, the shadow was gone. People also began to talk about how the Benders might have left Kansas. Some believed they went by wagon at night, avoiding towns. Others believed they used a train, because trains could erase distance quickly. Others believed they split up and traveled in different directions to confuse anyone chasing. Each idea sounded reasonable. And because each idea sounded reasonable, the case stayed open in the public mind. If everything is possible, then nothing is certain. While the public chased rumors, the victims' families lived inside a different kind of time. For them, the case was not a mystery to discuss at a store counter. It was a missing chair at a table. It was a letter never answered. It was a name spoken softly, because speaking it loudly hurt. The families wanted facts, not legends. They wanted a confirmed ending, not a story that changed every time it was told. But the frontier often gives families the hardest lesson of all. Some questions do not receive clean answers. Over time, the Bloody Benders became a symbol. To some, they were proof that the West was wild and cruel. To others, they were a warning about trusting strangers. To others, They were a puzzle that needed solving, because the human mind hates missing pieces. And that symbol grew stronger with every rumor. Ironically, the less people knew, the more people talked, because uncertainty keeps attention alive. Yet, in the middle of all this, the search did not completely stop. People kept looking. Officials kept receiving reports. Communities kept listening for clues. And somewhere in that noisy world of rumors, there was always a small chance that one report could be real, one true sighting, one true mistake by the 8 fugitives, one moment where a new identity slips. That hope was thin, but it was still there, and it led to the next stage of the story. Because when a mystery refuses to die, it does something strange. It pulls in new people, new investigators, new writers, new historians, people who were not there in 1873, but who refused to let the case become only a legend. After the cabin became a crime scene and the Benders vanished, the story did not end. It changed at first. The public talked about the Benders like a storm, as people focused on the fear, the mystery, and the chase. They repeated the most shocking details because shock is easy to remember. But there was another side of the case that did not feel like entertainment at all. The side that lived in empty rooms, the side that lived in families waiting for people who would never return. Because behind every rumor of the bloody Benders, there were real travelers with real lives. Some were heading to new land, some were visiting family, some were simply trying to survive another season. Many were never famous, many were never fully recorded, but each one mattered to someone. On the frontier, a person could disappear in a way that feels impossible today. A traveler might not carry official papers. A family might not know the exact route. A friend might assume the traveler chose to settle elsewhere. Letters might be lost. Towns might not share information quickly. That is how missing could become forgotten. And that is why the Benders case hurt so deeply. It showed how easy it was to erase a human life simply by erasing the trail. As investigators and locals tried to understand what happened, they began to collect names. Connected to people last seen traveling in that area, some names were repeated with more certainty than others. One name stood out because it pushed the case into action. Dr. William York. He was known. He was connected. He did not vanish quietly. But the case was not only about him. There was also the story of a man named George Longcore, often described as traveling with his young daughter. Their disappearance, told in later accounts, became one of the most heartbreaking parts of the overall story, because it reminded people that danger on the trail did not choose only strong targets. It could touch anyone. Whether every detail of every disappearance could be proven, the patterns still forced a hard question. How many people stopped at that cabin and never reached the next town? The number of victims became a battle between fact and rumor. Some reports suggested a smaller number based on bodies found. Other retellings suggested a larger number based on missing persons who were never officially confirmed. Over time, the numbers could grow in the telling, because the human mind wants a clean total, but the frontier rarely provides clean totals. Some graves could be missed. Some remains might never be identified. Some missing persons could have died elsewhere for other reasons. So investigators were left with a painful truth. They could confirm that terrible things happened, but they could not confirm every single detail. And that uncertainty created a second kind of suffering. Not only loss, but doubt. For a family waiting at home, doubt can be heavier than grief. Grief, as painful as it is, can sometimes settle into acceptance, but doubt keeps the mind moving in circles. Maybe he turned back. Maybe she got delayed. Maybe they are alive and cannot write. Maybe the rumor is wrong. Maybe the grave is not theirs. This is why frontier mysteries lasted so long. The world was too big, and information was too small. As time passed, the Benders' names grew louder than the victims' names. This is a common thing in crime stories. The villains become famous, The victims become numbers. But in a real biography of this case, the most important part is not the nickname, Bloody Benders. The most important part is the human cost. It is the families that did not get to say goodbye. It is the children who grew older without answers. It is the wives and husbands who had to keep living while their hearts stayed stuck on a road that led nowhere. In those small Kansas communities, people began to change their behavior. They traveled in groups more often. They avoided lonely stops. They asked more questions before trusting a stranger. The case reshaped how people saw help. A cabin offering food used to feel like kindness after the Benders. It could feel like a trap, and that fear did not stay in Kansas. It spread wherever the story was told, because the fear was simple and universal. If danger can look normal, then how can anyone be sure? There was also a quiet anger toward the system of the time. In the modern world, people expect records, photographs, fingerprints, and clear identification. But in the 1870s, the system was fragile. Local law enforcement was limited. Communication between towns was slow, and criminals could exploit that. So the case became a lesson in how easily a person can hide when society lacks tools to track identity. And when the Benders ran, they did not only run from a posse, they ran into a gap in history, a gap where a person could become unknown again. Still, investigators did not give up immediately. Communities continued to share reports. Some officials tried to verify sightings. Some tried to compare descriptions. Some attempted to connect missing person stories with real evidence. But the longer time passed, the harder it became. Memories fade. Details blur. New rumors replace old ones. And witnesses die or move away. Even the land changes. A field can be plowed. A cabin can collapse. A trail can disappear into grass. Time itself becomes the greatest hiding place. In the end, part 6 is about a shift in the story's center. It stops being only where did the Benders go, and it becomes who were the people who never came home? What were their lives like before the road? What were their dreams, their plans, their reasons for traveling? Because when a case becomes famous, the victims deserve to be remembered as more than shadows. They deserve to be remembered as people, and remembering them does something important. It takes power away from the killers. The Benders wanted control. They wanted silence. They wanted a world where travelers could vanish without consequence. But every time someone speaks the victims' names, even imperfectly, that silence breaks. Every time someone tells a story with respect, the victims take up space again, not as numbers, as lives. As the months passed after the Benders vanished, the case began to split in a dangerous way. One side was the slow work of truth-checking reports, comparing descriptions, and trying to follow trails that had already faded. The other side was something faster and darker. It was the desire for an ending, not a complicated ending, not an uncertain ending, a final ending. People did not want to live in fear forever. They did not want a story where the killers walked away. They wanted to believe the frontier could correct itself, and that is how the idea of frontier justice grew. In small towns and settlements, people spoke about it in the same way they spoke about storms. They could feel it coming. They talked about posses that formed quickly. They talked about men who rode out at night and did not ask permission. They talked about what had to be done when law felt too slow and too weak. This was not unusual in frontier life, but in a case as famous and frightening as the Bloody Benders, it became even more intense, because the more the public feared the Benders, the more the public wanted to believe someone had stopped them. Soon, stories began to spread that the Benders were caught after all, not by a court, not by official law, by ordinary men. In some versions, a group tracked them across rough land and cornered them. In other versions, someone recognized Kate in a town far away. In other versions, a farmer noticed something off about a traveling family, and word spread fast. Each story had different details, but the ending was often the same. The Benders were punished in secret, no trial, no paper record, no public proof, just a rumor of revenge. These revenge stories were powerful because they gave people comfort. If the Benders were dead, then the danger was over. If the Benders were dead, then the victims were not ignored. If the Benders were dead, then the world made sense again. But comfort is not evidence, and that is the problem. If a posse truly found them, why was there no confirmed body? Why was there no confirmed identity? Why did the story change every time it was told? The case kept slipping away, like a rope that will not hold a knot. Still, the idea of secret justice remained strong, because it matched how people felt. People were angry. They were afraid. They felt betrayed by the simple act of trust in a cabin, trust in a meal, trust in a smile. So when someone said they got what they deserved, many listeners wanted to believe it, and when many listeners want to believe something, a rumor becomes stronger than reality. The story around Kate Bender became especially dramatic. Some rumors described her as the smart one, the one who could talk her way out of anything. That made her the perfect character for a chase story. Clever, fearless, always one step ahead. Other rumors painted her as something else. Dangerous, but vulnerable, running alone, trying to hide in plain sight, and because Kate's image was not confirmed by any photograph, people could shape her into whatever they feared most. A charming liar, a cold killer, a runaway ghost. Each version made the story more intense and less reliable. There were also stories that the Benders were not alone. Some people believed there had to be helpers, friends or partners who gave warning, shared information, or helped them escape. That idea made the public even more suspicious of neighbors. It made people look at the entire region with a new kind of doubt. If the Benders had help, then the danger was not just for people. It was the possibility of a network. But again, the evidence was never clear enough to prove it. The case became a cloud always present, never solid. Another set of rumors went in the opposite direction. Instead of revenge, these rumors described escape. Some said the Benders reached a train line and traveled fast. Some said they split up and used different routes. Some said they left Kansas and disappeared into the larger movement of America. These rumors frightened people because they fit reality in those days. People changed towns often. They changed names. They could start over in another place where no one knew their past. If the Benders had planned ahead, they could have vanished like smoke. And if they had vanished like smoke, then the case was not only unsolved, it was unfinishable. Over time, the community's emotion began to harden. At first, there was shock, then fear, then anger, then exhaustion. Exhaustion changes the way people see truth. When a person is exhausted by uncertainty, a simple story feels better than a complicated one. A simple story feels like relief. That is why revenge rumors became so popular. They gave tired people permission to breathe. They're gone. It's over. Someone handled it. Whether it was true or not, it helped people sleep. For the families of the missing, rumors were not enough. A rumor cannot replace a person. A rumor cannot speak a name with certainty. A rumor cannot confirm what happened in the final moments. And a rumor cannot bring justice in the way a courtroom can. Those families were forced to carry both kinds of pain, the pain of loss and the pain of never knowing. For them, an uncertain ending was not relief. It was a second wound. It shows how a community reacts. When official answers do not arrive, some people turn to careful investigation. Some people turn to stories. Some people turn to revenge. And in cases like this, all three can exist at the same time. The result is a fog where truth and rumor mix together, a fog that still surrounds the bloody Benders today. So the question becomes sharper. If the Benders were punished in secret, why did no one prove it? If the Benders escaped, why did they never clearly appear again? And if the benders were never truly identified, how many false endings were created by people who simply wanted closure? The case does not give an easy answer. It only offers a choice between possibilities, and each possibility is unsettling. After the bloody benders disappeared, people expected the fear to fade. They believed time would swallow the story the same way the prairie swallowed wagon tracks. They believed the cabin would rot, the trail would change, and the case would become a local memory. But the opposite happened. The land stayed, the question stayed, and the story grew. Because when a mystery has no proven ending, it does not close. It keeps breathing, quietly, in the background of history. The Bender homestead did not remain a normal farm. It became a place people spoke about carefully. Some locals avoided it. Some people pointed at it from a distance. Some visitors came out of pure curiosity. On the frontier, a place can gain a reputation like a person can. Once a location is linked to fear, it becomes more than land. It becomes a symbol. And that symbol made people feel two things at once. A strong need to look away, and an even stronger need to look closer. The cabin itself did not last forever, but the idea of it lasted longer than whatever could. People remembered the layout, they remembered the curtain, they remembered the chair that later stories made famous. Whether every detail was perfect or not, the memory stayed sharp. Because fear sharpens memory, and even those who are not alive during it began to learn the story as if it happened yesterday. It was retold at kitchen tables. It was retold in barbershops. It was retold around fires and in newspapers. Each time it was retold, it changed slightly, and each change made the case both bigger and harder to separate from legend. As years passed, the Bloody Benders stopped being just a Kansas case. They became part of the larger American idea of the Wild West. The Wild West is often pictured as brave cowboys, quick gunfights, and rugged adventure. But real frontier life included another truth. Isolation can be dangerous. When there are long roads and few witnesses, a crime can hide easily. A person can disappear without leaving a clear sign. A criminal can move on before anyone realizes. What happened? The Benders became a dark reminder of that truth. But history does not survive on fear alone. It survives on records over time. People who cared about the truth began to collect what they could. They searched old newspapers. They compared reports. They looked at maps. They tried to understand the timeline. They asked basic questions that sound simple, but are not simple at all. Where exactly was the cabin? What exactly was found, and when? Which details are confirmed, and which were added later? Because in a case like this, the most dangerous thing is not only the crime, it is confusion. If a story becomes too wild, it can erase the real people inside it. It can turn victims into background characters. It can turn investigators into myths. It can turn the whole event into entertainment. So careful researchers tried to do the opposite. They tried to slow the story down. They tried to pull it back toward what could be supported and away from what was only repeated. This created a strange tension. Many people wanted the story to stay dramatic. They wanted it to stay scary. They wanted it to stay simple. But history is not always dramatic. It is often unclear. It is full of missing pieces. So anyone trying to tell the truth about the Benders faced a difficult job. How to respect the victims while admitting the gaps, without turning the case into a fantasy. That is why the Bloody Benders still feel alive. Today, not because the killers were proven to return, but because the story still has open doors. Over time, the place connected to the Benders became a point of interest. People wanted to stand on the land and feel how empty it was. They wanted to imagine the trail and the travelers. They wanted to understand how something so terrible could happen in such an ordinary space. This is a human impulse. People visit battlefields. They visit old prisons. They visit disaster sites. Not because they enjoy suffering, but because standing in a real place makes a story feel real. It turns history into something the body can sense, not only the mind. And then there is the land itself. Land does not speak in words, but it holds signs. So in later years, people looked at the ground the way the first searchers looked at it, carefully. They asked whether anything remained under the soil, not to relive horror, but to learn what could still be proven. Because evidence, even small evidence, can help correct false claims. It can help confirm what happened. It can help stop rumor from replacing truth. Even if the benders were never caught, the land might still offer pieces of the puzzle. Small, silent pieces. For families connected to the case, remembrance matters. It matters because time tries to erase. Time changes towns. Time changes names. Time turns people into numbers. But remembrance pushes back, it says. These travelers existed. They had plans. They had families. They had futures that were taken. And even if the killers were never proven in court, the victims should not vanish a second time, this time into forgetfulness. That is a different kind of justice. Not legal justice, memory. Justice. The benders, meanwhile, remained a question mark. Some people still believed the benders were killed quietly. Some believed they escaped into new identities. Some believed they separated and lived ordinary lives afterward. But all those beliefs share one problem. They cannot be confirmed. And that is why the case remains famous. A solved case has an ending. People move on. An unsolved case becomes a mirror. People look into it and see what they fear most. That evil can wear normal clothes. That danger can offer dinner. That justice can fail. That a person can vanish into history. With time, the bloody benders stopped being only a case. They became a legend. That change did not happen all at once. It happened slowly, the way a trail becomes a road. One retelling here, another retelling there. A newspaper story. A conversation. A warning passed to the next traveler. And after years, the story became bigger than the people inside it. The name Bloody Benders became a symbol of the darkest side of the Wild West. Legends grow because they feel useful. They give people a lesson. Even when the details are unclear, they become warnings wrapped in drama. The Bloody Benders legend offered several lessons at once. Do not trust every smiling stranger. Do not stop alone on a quiet road. Do not assume safety just because the place looks normal. In a frontier world, those lessons felt real, but there was a cost. The more the story became a legend, the harder it became to separate truth from extra details added later. Many versions of the story began to include strong, clear scenes. A traveler enters the cabin. A curtain hangs in the middle of the room. A special chair sits near the curtain. A meal is served. A sudden attack happens from behind. These scenes are easy to picture, which is why they spread so well. But easy to picture is not the same as perfectly proven. Some parts come from early reports. Other parts may have been shaped by repetition. Over time, the story's strongest images became the story's most repeated images, even when the evidence behind them was not always clear. That is how legends operate. They keep what is vivid, not always what is precise. The legend also changed how people viewed the benders themselves. Instead of four unclear people with uncertain identities, the benders became characters. John Sr. became the silent, old man. Ma became the cold mother. John Jr. became the watcher. Kate became the dangerous charm. These roles made the story easier to understand, but real life is rarely that clean. A legend simplifies, because it has to. A true biographer tries to do the opposite. Tries to hold complexity even when it makes people uncomfortable. The biggest problem with legends is what they do to victims. When the villain becomes famous, the victims can become invisible. Names are lost. Faces are forgotten. People become numbers, or they become travelers, as if that is all they were. But those travelers were not just travelers. They were sons, fathers, daughters, mothers, friends, neighbors. They had reasons for moving. They had dreams they were chasing. They had plans that were never finished. A legend can erase those details, even without meaning to, and that is why the case must be told carefully, because the goal is not to make the benders larger than life. The goal is to remember the human truth. Another thing the legend did was create false certainty. In many retellings, the number of victims becomes fixed, even when history is not that clear. In many retellings, the methods become exact, even when the sources are mixed. In many retellings, the endings become confident, even when no ending was proven. People like certainty. Certainty feels safe. But in this case, certainty is dangerous because it can replace real investigation. It can cause people to repeat details that were never verified. It can turn a mystery into a story that sounds solved, even when it isn't. As the legend grew, it also inspired people to solve it. Writers suggested endings. Locals shared family stories. Some claimed to know someone who knew what happened. Some claimed to have proof hidden away. Many of these claims could not be confirmed, but they added fuel, because the bloody Bender's legend did not only scare people, it challenged people. It gave them a puzzle with missing pieces, and humans hate missing pieces. So the story continued to attract attention generation after generation. There is another reason people could not let go. The Benders vanished. That is the core wound at the center of the case. If the Benders had been caught, tried, and punished, the story would still be shocking, but it would be finished. But because they vanished, the story keeps asking the same question. What if they got away? That fear hits a deep human nerve. People want to believe the world balances itself. They want to believe harm is answered. They want to believe danger is contained. An unsolved escape suggests the opposite. It suggests that sometimes evil is not captured, and that thought is hard to accept. So the legend becomes a way to cope. If people cannot prove an ending, they create one. They imagine a posse catching them. They imagine a punishment in secret. They imagine Kate escaping, then falling. Later, they imagine the Benders splitting, each meeting a different fate. These imagined endings do not come from evidence. They come from need, a need for closure, a need to place the fear inside a box and shut the lid. But the real history refuses to fit neatly into that box. Not a neat case file, a living legend, a legend that changes depending on who tells it and why. They tell it. To some, it is a warning about trust. To others, it is a symbol of frontier danger. To others, it is a mystery begging to be solved. To others, it is a tragedy that should be spoken with care. And all of those views can be true at the same time. Now the story stands at the edge of its final chapter, because a biography must end somewhere, even if the real case did not end cleanly. So, the final question becomes this: what does the Bloody Benders story leave behind? Not only fear, not only shock, what is the lasting meaning? What is the final lesson? By the end of the Bloody Benders story, one thing becomes clear. This case did not end the way people wanted. There was no public trial, no final confession, no moment where the law pointed to four faces and said, "This is them." Instead, there was an empty cabin, disturbed earth. And for people who slipped into history, that is why the mystery still holds power. But part 10 is where the story must slow down. Take a breath and close with what matters most: truth, meaning, and the human. Lesson. The Bloody Benders were remembered as a family, but even that word carries uncertainty. Some believed they were truly related. Others believed they were a group pretending to be one. On the frontier, it was easy to build a new identity, and it was even easier to hide behind a normal life. A cabin, a meal, a smile, those ordinary things became the mask. And behind the mask, people began to disappear. What is known is painful, but simple. Travelers stopped near their homestead. Then some of them never reached the next town. Later, the cabin was found abandoned, and the ground around it was linked to terrible discoveries. That is the core truth. That is why the case became famous. But when the public asked the next question, where are the Benders now? History did not provide a clear answer. It only provided possibilities. Some believed the Benders were caught and killed quietly, somewhere far from Kansas. That idea felt satisfying because it sounded like justice. But it was never proven in a way that closed the case for everyone. Others believed the Benders escaped. That idea felt frightening because it suggested danger can win, but it also fit the reality of the time. People traveled, names changed, and records were thin. And there is a third possibility that is the hardest for many people to accept, that the Benders might have disappeared into ordinary life, not into a dramatic ending, not into a famous capture, just into the background. A new town, a new name, a new story told to new neighbors. If that happened, the Benders did not vanish like ghosts. They vanished like people. This is where the case becomes more than a Wild West. It becomes a lesson about how society works. Because the Benders did not only rely on violence, they relied on a gap between towns, a gap between records, a gap between what people feel and what people can prove. On the frontier, that gap was wide. A person could travel alone and never be missed quickly. A family could wait weeks before realizing something was truly wrong. A local sheriff could have limited resources. A report might move slowly from one place to another. A description could be unclear. A name could be false. The Benders used that weakness like a tool, and that is part of what makes the case so unsettling. It shows how danger grows when a world is disconnected. But the story is not only about weakness, it is also about resistance, because the case did not stay silent. People searched, people compared stories, people paid attention to patterns. The disappearance of Dr. William York became a turning point, because it forced the community to stop treating disappearances as normal frontier loss. It forced people to look harder. It forced people to connect the dots. And once the community connected the dots, the Benders could not stay comfortable. They ran. So even without a proven capture, there is a form of truth here. The community pushed back. The silence did not win completely. Over time, the story also changed the way people traveled. After the Benders, travelers learned to be more careful. They learned to avoid stopping alone when possible. They learned to ask more questions. They learned to trust instincts when something felt wrong. That is not a perfect defense, but it is a human one, because the frontier was built on trust between strangers. Without that trust, people could not survive long journeys. But blind trust can become a trap. So the story became a warning pass forward. Be kind, but be careful. There is also the question of memory. When crimes become legends, the villains can become famous, but a true biographer should not let the killers take the center stage forever. The real center is the people who never returned, the travelers who were not just travelers, the families who waited, the children who grew up with questions. Those lives deserve respect. And respect in a story looks like this: not turning pain into a joke, not celebrating violence, not treating the victims as background. It means remembering that every missing person had a name. Even if history failed to record it clearly, it means remembering that fear is real, but so is loss. So what is the final meaning of the Bloody Benders story? It is not simply the West was violent. It is deeper. It is about how evil can hide inside normal life. It is about how identity can be used like a costume. It is about how people can vanish when systems are weak. And it is about how communities fight back when they finally see the pattern. The mystery remains. But the lesson does not require a perfect ending. A perfect ending would be comforting, but history does not always offer comfort. Sometimes it offers warnings instead. In the end, The Bloody Benders did not leave behind a courtroom record. They left behind a question mark. And that question mark became part of American memory because it touches something universal. The fear that danger can look ordinary, a cabin can look safe, a family can look harmless, a friendly voice can hide a plan. That fear is not limited to the 1870s. It is human, and that is why this story is still told. Not because people love darkness, but because people want to understand it, recognize it, and survive it. The Benders may have escaped the law, but they did not escape history. Their cabin became a symbol. Their name became a warning. Their mystery became a lesson passed forward across time, and the people they tried to erase are still remembered because the story is still being told. If the viewer wants more real Wild West mysteries and true stories that feel like movies, this is the moment to subscribe. And if the viewer has a theory escape, secret justice, or new identities, leave it in the comments. Because the question is still open. Did the Bloody Benders disappear into the frontier? Or did the frontier find them first? And as the wind moves over the Kansas prairie, the land stays quiet. But the story does not.